When I first read this story, I was very surprised. I haven't seen so much dirt in a long time. Betrayal for the sake of retribution. Swingers and even a lost panties. If I were in that situation, I would have come out of it gray-haired. Enjoy the movie. Hello everyone, I guess the thing that gets to me the most is how oblivious I was. We all hear those stories about someone cheating, and we think, how the hell did they not notice? But let me tell you, it's not that simple. You think everything's fine. You don't go snooping into your wife's business. Why would you? You're busy enough with your own stuff. And Clara, well, she didn't give off any obvious red flags. Or maybe she did, but I wasn't paying attention. I should have paid attention. But I didn't. You see, Clara was the kind of woman who was always up to something. Always had plans, meetings, events, shit I couldn't care less about, to be honest. She'd talk about her job, her co-workers, who's getting promoted, who's screwing who in the office. And I'd nod along, pretending to give a damn. Looking back, maybe I should have been more interested. Maybe if I had listened more closely, things wouldn't have blindsided me the way they did. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. Let me start from the beginning. So Clara, my wife, at least she was my wife at the time, she cheated on me. And not just in the typical way you hear about. No, this wasn't your run-of-the-mill affair where you find out she's sneaking around behind your back. No, she did it with my best friend. And the worst part? It happened while I was in the same room. Yeah, you heard that right. I was right there, completely unaware of what was going on. How screwed up is that? But let's not jump ahead too fast. To really understand how messed up this situation was, you need to know about the group of people we used to hang out with. There were 10 of us, a tight-knit group, or so I thought. We did everything together. Holidays, weekends away, dinners at each other's houses. Some of them were married, some dating, and a couple of us were just stuck somewhere in between. Let me tell you about Tom. Tom was a great guy. At least that's what I thought back then. He was one of those guys who women always seemed to like. He was charming, easy to talk to, made people feel comfortable. But when it came to relationships, the guy had no luck. It was like every relationship he had just exploded in his face. He'd date a girl for a few months, and next thing you know, it was over. He'd shrug it off and laugh about it, say something like, well, that's just life, huh? And we'd all move on. Then there was his sister, Martha. Now, Martha was something else. She had this presence about her, the kind of woman who walks into a room, and everyone turns to look. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend. And for a while, we all thought maybe she and Tom would start bringing different dates to our little gatherings. But that never happened. She stayed single. And for some reason, she liked hanging out with us, her brother's group of friends, more than she liked going out and meeting new people. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, well, maybe there was more to that too. Anyway, about a month before everything came crashing down, we decided to plan this little weekend trip. The whole group. We rented this massive cabin out in the woods. Actually, calling it a cabin doesn't do it justice. It was more like a freaking villa. The thing had so many rooms you could get lost walking from one end to the other. The idea was simple. Get out of town, drink too much, tell stupid stories, and just enjoy a break from reality. That first day was a blast. The air was fresh, and it felt like the kind of getaway we all needed. We drank, we laughed, we sang songs, and everyone seemed to be in high spirits. I remember feeling good, like life wasn't so bad. By the time the night rolled around, we were inside, all sprawled out in the living room, the place lit up with the glow from the fireplace. Everyone had a drink in their hand, and we were still riding that high from the day. The music was playing low in the background, and Clara was sitting next to me, smiling like everything was just perfect. And then, there's Tom. Tom was sitting on one of those oversized chairs, a beer in his hand, looking all relaxed. I remember looking over at him and noticing something shiny sticking out of his pocket. At first, I thought it was just a reflection of the light or something, but then I realized there was something there. Now, I wasn't really thinking much at the time. After all, we were all pretty buzzed. So I did something stupid. I reached over and yanked whatever was out of his pocket without even asking. And there they were, a pair of women's panties. The whole room erupted in laughter. It was hysterical. We were all drunk, and it just seemed like the funniest thing in the world. I started waving them around, saying, "Tom, buddy, what's this? You changing up your wardrobe these days?" Everyone was laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Tom played it cool. He just smiled and said, "Oh, I found them in one of the rooms. Must have been left behind from the last people who stayed here." And then he said something that I'll never forget. "Hey, maybe they're my sisters. You think she left them lying around?" The room lost it. People were rolling with laughter, making jokes about him spying on his sister or whatever. I joined in too, cracking jokes, playing along. It was one of those moments where everything just seems so lighthearted, where nothing feels serious, even though it should have been. Because here's the thing. Those panties? They weren't just anyone's. They were Clara's. My wife's panties in my best friend's pocket, and I had no clue. None. I can't even begin to explain the gut punch that realization gave me. But, of course, I didn't know it at the time. At that moment, I was just another idiot laughing along, thinking everything was just a big joke. So, after we all had a good laugh over the panties incident, and since no one could claim ownership, someone had the bright idea to burn them. I think it was Tom who suggested it. He said something about getting rid of them like they were cursed. It was late, and we were all buzzed, so of course it sounded like a fantastic idea at the time. We stumbled outside with a bottle of whiskey, making this big show of it like it was some kind of ritual. We found a spot by the fire pit, and someone started a little flame. We all gathered around, laughing like idiots as we watched those panties burn. I think Tom was the one who threw them in, and we cheered like it was some kind of twisted offering to the party gods. It was stupid, really, but we were drunk enough for it to be hilarious. That was just the first night, though. We hadn't even gotten started yet. 5 days in that cabin, and this was just the warm-up. The next day, we woke up a little groggy but in good spirits. We had a full day ahead of us, so we all decided to take it easy with the drinking until later. We went on a little hike, had a huge lunch, and then settled back into the villa to relax. I was still laughing about the whole panties situation from the night before, not thinking much of it. That is, until I saw something else. We were all lounging around the living room, half watching some random movie on TV, when I noticed something red peeking out from the couch cushions. My heart did this weird lurch in my chest, and I felt a knot in my gut. I pulled it out, and there was a red bra. And not just any red bra. It looked suspiciously similar to those panties we'd burned the night before. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about it just didn't sit right with me. So, I looked over at Clara, my wife, who was sitting with the rest of the group, laughing about something Derek had said. I held up the bra and said, "Clara, is this yours?" She barely glanced at it before shaking her head, a smirk on her face. "Nope, not mine. Just because it's red doesn't mean it matches, honey." I wasn't satisfied, but it looks just like those panties from last night. Same shade of red. Clara raised an eyebrow and let out this irritated sigh, like I was being ridiculous. "John, just because it's red doesn't mean it's the same thing. A lot of women own red underwear. You seriously think I'd be dumb enough to leave stuff like that lying around?" Everyone started to chuckle like it was some kind of joke. I could feel my face heating up. I was trying to stay cool, but she was making me look like an idiot in front of everyone. And the worst part? I didn't have a single shred of proof to back up my suspicions because we'd burned the damn panties the night before. All I had was this gnawing feeling in my gut that something was off. But what could I do? If I pushed any harder, I'd look like a jealous asshole, and she'd just laugh it off again. So, I dropped it, for the moment at least. But it didn't sit right with me. Later that afternoon, I pulled Derek aside. He was one of the few people in the group I actually trusted, probably because he wasn't as close with Clara as the others were. I laid it all out for him, told him how I'd found the panties, and now this red bra was making me suspicious. Derek listened, but when I finished, he just shrugged. "Man, I don't think you've got anything to worry about," he said, shaking his head. "Clara's not stupid. If she was cheating on you, she wouldn't leave something like that lying around, especially when we're all here." I wanted to believe him. I really did, but something in me just wouldn't let it go. The truth is all these people, Tom, Martha, the others, they were Clara's friends first. I only got to know them because I started dating her. They had history, inside jokes, stories from before I was even in the picture. It always felt like I was a bit of an outsider in my own marriage. I asked Derek for a favor. Listen, man, if I get too drunk tonight, can you keep an eye on Tom and Claire for me? Just watch out, okay? Derek gave me a look like I was overreacting, but he nodded. Sure, man, but I really don't think anything's going on. I wasn't so sure, so I decided to make another move. While everyone was outside, getting things ready for another night of drinking, I remembered something. I had an old video recorder in my backpack. It was the kind that automatically started recording when it sensed movement, left over from when I upgraded my dashcam in the car. I had packed it by accident, but now it seemed like the perfect tool for a little insurance. So while everyone was busy outside, I snuck back into the house, grabbed the recorder from my bag, and set it up in the corner of the living room. It wasn't exactly hidden, but no one would notice it unless they were looking for it. And once it was in place, I felt a bit more at ease. If something shady was going on, I was going to catch it. I didn't know what I'd do with the footage, but just knowing the camera was there gave me some confidence. That night, I planned to drink like the rest of them, but this time, I was going to be a little more careful. I had eyes on them now, even if they didn't know it. If Clara and Tom were really up to something, I was about to find out. That night, I was already 3 sheets to the wind by the time the party really got going. The booze hit harder than I expected, and eventually, I stumbled off to my room. I remember collapsing onto the bed, the world spinning around me, and then nothing. I was out cold. Not even a bomb could have woken me up. I slept like a log, dead to the world. When I woke up the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Most of the group was already up, groaning through their hangovers, but no one else was sleeping. I dragged myself out of bed, head still pounding, and went to find Derek. He was sitting outside on the porch, lazily sipping on some coffee. I sat down next to him, rubbing my temples. How'd things go last night? I asked, trying to sound casual, but the question had more weight than he knew. Derek glanced at me, then shrugged. Everything was fine, man. Nothing happened. You were out like a light. I stayed up until the last minute, made sure nothing weird was going on. His words should have reassured me, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. I forced a nod, muttering a thanks before heading back inside. That's when I remembered the video recorder. My heart started racing again. I'd almost forgotten about it in the haze of booze and sleep, but now it was all I could think about. I rushed to where I'd hidden the recorder, my hands shaking slightly as I grabbed it. I quickly rewound the footage, skipping through hours of nothingness, until I found the moment I'd been waiting for. And what I saw on that tiny screen left me completely numb. The video showed Clara and me stumbling into the room. Except it was all her. She dragged me in, my legs barely working. I was completely out of it, lying on the bed, completely oblivious to what was happening around me. Clara leaned over me, checking to see if I was really out cold. Then she kissed my forehead like I was a child. And then Tom appeared behind her. He leaned in close, whispered something I couldn't quite make out. And then, this part still messes me up. He kissed me too, right on the cheek. Clara laughed softly, and Tom muttered something that chilled me. It's wonderful, isn't it? Then he left the room. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what the hell I'd just seen. Derek had lied to me. He'd said nothing happened, but clearly that wasn't true. He'd either passed out, missed it, or he was in on it. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. In that moment, I knew my marriage was dead, but I wasn't ready for a fight just yet. No, I needed more. I needed it to hurt, not just for me, but for them. And for that, I had to play my cards carefully. That evening, when everyone was drinking again, I kept a low profile, pretending everything was cool. I watched the group closely, my eyes tracking Clara and Tom. They didn't do anything obvious, just laughed and joked like nothing had happened. But I wasn't looking for them. Not tonight. Then I noticed Martha slipping away. She quietly left the room, and I took my chance. I followed her. I found her in one of the empty rooms, sitting on the bed, almost like she was waiting for me. She wasn't surprised when I walked in. In fact, She looked at me with this knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She spoke first. "Are you finally ready?" Her words hung in the air, and for a second, I had no idea what she was talking about. Ready for what? But I couldn't show hesitation. So I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." I wasn't ready. Not at all. But whatever Martha thought was going on, I was about to find out. Without saying another word, she stood up and started undressing. It happened so fast that my mind barely had time to catch up. I should have stopped it. I should have said something, but I didn't. I went along with it, like a man driven by some twisted desire for revenge. Before I knew it, we were having sex right there in that room. When it was over, I felt this wave of regret wash over me. I stood up, ready to leave, wanted to put the whole thing behind me. But then Martha said something that made my blood run cold. "I'm glad you're finally part of the club. Now we don't have to hide anymore." I froze, my hand on the door. "What?" She smiled at me, oblivious to the storm raging inside my head. I'm glad Clara finally told you about the whole thing. It's been hard keeping our swinger parties secret from you." I felt like I was going to explode. Swinger parties? Secret swinger parties? My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what she was saying. But somehow I managed to keep my cool. I forced a smile and nodded. Yeah, she told me. "It's a lot to take in." Martha laughed, relieved. "I'm just glad we don't have to sneak around anymore. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone until you're ready. I know this stuff takes time." I nodded again, fighting the urge to scream. "Yeah, I appreciate that. Just give me a little more time. I need to get used to it." Martha smiled, completely oblivious. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I left the room, my head spinning with more questions than answers. So that's what this was. This whole time, there had been this secret life happening right under my nose, and I'd been too blind to see it. Now I knew. But what the hell was I supposed to do with this information? The next day, after the bomb Martha dropped on me, I knew exactly what I had to do. But I couldn't rush it. I had to play it smart. If I wanted the full picture, I needed to see it all. And I needed proof. No one was going to believe me without it. Hell, I could barely believe what I'd stumbled into myself. So, that night I acted like everything was normal. I drank, joked, laughed along with everyone like I hadn't just found out my entire life had been one big lie. I pretended to get drunk, stumbling around with a beer in my hand, making a show of it so no one suspected a thing. When it got late enough, I said my goodnights and headed to bed. At least that's what they thought. In reality, I was wide awake, lying there, waiting for it to start. I had my phone ready. I deleted some old videos and pictures to make sure I had enough storage, and I downloaded an app that would record in the background without the screen lighting up. I positioned myself perfectly so that my phone would capture everything. I had one shot at this. I couldn't mess it up. An hour passed. Then two. The house was quiet, but I knew that was just the calm before the storm. I could hear muffled footsteps, whispers outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't blow my cover now. Then it happened. The door to the room creaked open, and I saw Clara and Tom sneak in, along with a couple of others from the group. They were whispering, giggling like teenagers who thought they were being sneaky. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to be passed out as they moved around the room. And then the real show started. I won't go into too many details, partly because I don't want my account banned from Reddit, but also because, frankly, it was disgusting. They were all in on it together. The swinging, the sex, there was so much dirt there, more than I could ever have imagined. The kind of stuff that made my stomach churn just watching it. And these were people I'd thought were my friends. My wife, doing this right under my nose. You filmed everything? My phone silently captured it all, the evidence I needed. But by the time it was over, I felt like I'd seen enough to last me a lifetime. My hands were shaking, and I had to fight the urge to storm out right then and there. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to keep it together for a little while longer. Once they were done and the room finally cleared out, I didn't waste any time. I packed my things quickly and quietly, making sure I didn't leave anything behind. I didn't want to stay there a second longer than I had to. My heart was racing as I slipped out of the house, unnoticed. I don't even think anyone would have cared if they'd seen me. They were too wrapped up in their own twisted world to notice anything else. The villa was a few kilometers from where we'd parked the cars, down a long dirt road through the forest. Walking through the woods in the dead of night, with nothing but the moonlight filtering through the trees, was unnerving, to say the least. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of a branch, made me jump. But it didn't matter. My mind was elsewhere. As I walked through that dark, creepy forest, all I could think about was my next move. The footage I had on my phone was just the start. I wanted more than just proof of Clara's betrayal. I wanted to hit back, to make sure they felt even a fraction of the pain I'd been drowning in. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. I was going to take the next step, and it wasn't just going to hurt. It was going to destroy them. When I finally made it back home, the drive through the empty streets felt surreal, like I was floating in some kind of dream, or more like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My head was spinning from the events of the past 24 hours, and the weight of everything that had happened was suffocating. I sat there in the car for a minute, the engine still running, just staring at the dark outline of my house, trying to calm the storm inside me. But no amount of deep breathing could erase the memory of what I'd seen, of what I now knew. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket. It had been silent during the drive, but now notifications were lighting it up like crazy. Missed calls, texts. I knew exactly what was happening. Someone in that house, one of those backstabbing people I used to call friends, had realized I wasn't in the room where they left me, passed out and clueless, and they were freaking out. The texts were rolling in, probably trying to figure out where I was, what I'd seen, and why I wasn't answering. I didn't check them right away. I was already ahead of them. I sat down at my desk, still in my jacket, my mind racing as I opened my laptop. I knew I couldn't keep all of this inside. It wasn't just about getting it off my chest. It was about control. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was holding the cards and I wasn't going to let them slip. But I also wasn't about to throw all my ammunition into the open just yet. No, I needed to be careful. Precise. I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most. I started typing a post, keeping it brief but pointed. I wasn't about to reveal every nasty detail. No, this was going to be more of a teaser. I described just enough to set the stage, censored the parts that could get me banned from any platform, but left plenty of blanks to fill in their imaginations. I talked about betrayal, lies, and how I'd uncovered things that were never meant to be seen. I let it simmer, giving just enough information to stir up curiosity, panic, and maybe a little fear. But I wasn't done. I had the footage, the real proof of what had gone down. The things I saw through that lens, well, they were too explicit to mention here. There was more dirt than anyone would believe. So I uploaded the video through a hidden link. It wasn't public, of course. I wasn't that reckless. But I left it clear. If anyone wanted to know the truth, if they were brave enough to ask for it, they could message me, and I'd send them the link. A little part of me relished the idea of them squirming as they debated whether to reach out, knowing full well what I'd captured. The post itself? I set up a burner account, no profile picture, no name, nothing that could link it back to me directly. But let's be real. It wasn't going to take long for those so-called friends to piece it together. No one else had access to that video. No one else could have done this. And when they figured it out, I knew they'd panic. Once everything was ready, I hit post, then leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline still rushing through me. It felt like I'd just crossed a line, one I couldn't uncross, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. But I didn't care. I had set the wheels in motion. After a long, restless night of tossing and turning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. It hadn't stopped going off since early morning. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. It was all there, flooding in like a tidal wave. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages. The names on the caller ID told me everything I needed to know. Derek, Tom, Martha. They were all reaching out, panicked. I didn't bother listening to the voicemails right away. I could guess what they were going to say. And then there were the texts. My so-called friends were livid. The messages were full of threats, insults, and accusations, calling me out for airing their dirty laundry. They were terrified I was going to blow up their lives, ruin their reputations with the video, and expose their twisted little secrets to the world. They knew what I had done, and they were desperate to stop me from doing more damage. But it was too late. They knew I held the upper hand now. What surprised me the most was that Clara still hadn't reached out. Not a single call or text from her. I don't know if she was trying to play it cool or if she was scared of what I had on her, but the silence from her side was deafening. As my phone kept buzzing, I knew this was just the beginning. I wasn't fazed by their threats. In fact, I expected them. They thought they could intimidate me into backing down, but they didn't realize I was already way past that point. I couldn't waste any more time. There was one more thing I had to do that morning. I grabbed my phone, found the contact for a lawyer I'd been meaning to call for months, and dialed the number. The conversation was quick and to the point. I wasn't in the mood for drawn-out explanations. I told him I needed divorce papers prepared. No more waiting around. No more second chances. I wanted this done as fast as possible and with no loopholes. The marriage was dead, and I wasn't about to let Clara walk away from this without consequences. By the time I hung up, the calls and texts had finally slowed down. But I knew this was only the calm before the storm. The damage was done, and I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I needed to walk away from that wreck of a life for good. And as I sat there, staring at the messages still coming in, I realized this was only the beginning. The fallout was just starting. When Clara finally came back, I was ready. I had spent most of the day packing up her things, throwing everything she owned into boxes. I didn't care how neat or organized it was. I just wanted her out of my life as fast as possible. The place looked like a hurricane had blown through it, with boxes stacked haphazardly by the front door, her clothes tossed in without a second thought. I wasn't trying to be kind anymore. I was done. She walked in like she owned the place, her eyes scanning the room, probably expecting some kind of argument. But when she saw the boxes, reality hit her. She tried to talk like this was some kind of misunderstanding, like we could somehow work it out. Maybe she thought she could charm her way out of this, the same way she had with everything else in our marriage. But I didn't want to hear a word she had to say. Before she could even get a sentence out, I just looked her dead in the eyes and told her, "Go to hell." She froze, not expecting me to be that blunt. She wasn't alone, either. She had brought some of her so-called friends with her, the same ones I used to think were mine too. They stood behind her, smirking like they had something on me, like they were going to intimidate me into backing down. One of them, Derek, stepped forward with that smug look on his face and said, "You're going to regret what you did, man. You think you can just mess with people's lives like this?" I didn't flinch. I was so far beyond caring at that point. "If you don't get out of here right now, I'll call the cops," I said, my voice calm, but with enough bite that they knew I wasn't bluffing. They looked at each other for a second, not sure if I was serious. But then Clara stepped in, trying to reason with me one last time. I didn't care what she had to say anymore. I just pointed at the door and told her to get out. She hesitated, but eventually they all left, muttering threats and insults under their breath as they walked out. I slammed the door behind them, the sound of it echoing through the empty house. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. They didn't sue me like I half expected them to, but the threats didn't stop either. Every now and then, I get a text or a call from an unknown number, just vague, veiled threats meant to rattle me. They wanted me to feel scared, but honestly, I was just tired. I wasn't going to waste my energy reporting it to the police. It was all just noise at this point. The divorce process, thankfully, was quick. There wasn't much to fight over. Clara knew she didn't have a leg to stand on, and I wasn't interested in dragging it out. Within a few weeks, the papers were signed, and it was over. Once the divorce was finalized, I wasted no time. I put the house up for sale, and it didn't take long before I found a buyer. Good riddance to the place, Honestly, it was full of too many memories, too much pain. I didn't want any part of it anymore. Within weeks, I packed up everything that was left of my life and moved to another state. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not that they would have cared. I just needed to get away from it all, to start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere where no one knew who I was or what I'd been through. But no matter how far I go, what I saw during those last few days still haunts me. It's like it's burned into my brain. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see it. I'm hoping that with time, it'll fade, but right now, it's still too fresh. I guess that's where this story ends. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I can tell you one thing. I'm not letting people get close to me like that again. Not after what happened. So, to everyone who took the time to read this, thank you. And a word of advice, be careful who you let into your life. Sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who will destroy you. Update. It's been a few months since I packed up and moved away from everything I knew. The house, the so-called friends, the memories, all of it is in the rear view now. I found a place in a quiet little town, far from the chaos of my old life. It's peaceful here. No one knows who I am, no one cares about my past, and that's exactly how I want it to be. On the surface, things are good. I've got a new job that doesn't remind me of everything I lost, and I'm slowly settling into this new rhythm. The people here are friendly enough, but I keep my distance. It's not that I don't want to connect with anyone. It's just that I don't know how to anymore. Trust has become this fragile, foreign thing. Every time someone tries to get close, I find myself pulling back, putting up walls I don't even know how to take down. I still have nightmares sometimes, not about what happened directly, but just this overwhelming sense of betrayal, like I can't let my guard down, not even in my sleep. It's like a part of me is always waiting for the next blow to land. I keep replaying those moments in my head, Clara, Tom, that whole twisted group, and it's like a scar that won't heal. I can't shake it, no matter how hard I try to convince myself that I'm free of them. I've met a few people in this new place, and they've been kind. They've invited me to drinks, to get-togethers, but every time, I find an excuse to stay home. It's not that I don't want to be around people. It's just that I don't trust myself to let them in. I keep thinking, what if it happens again? What if the next person I let in turns out to be just like Clara, just like Tom? So, I keep to myself. I go to work, come home, and try to focus on rebuilding the parts of my life that aren't shattered. It's lonely, yeah, but it's safer. I don't have the energy to risk being hurt like that again. Not yet. Maybe one day, I'll find it in me to trust someone again. Maybe I'll meet someone who can break through this wall I've built around myself. But for now, I'm content with the distance. It's better to be alone than to risk being destroyed all over again. So, that's where I am now. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore, and I don't have to wonder what's being said behind my back. For now, that's enough. To anyone reading this, just be careful. Guard your heart, because once it's broken the way mine was, it's not easy to put the pieces back together.